In Cleveland, the quarterback conversation has never been simple, never been easy, never been settled for long, and as the Browns prepare for another season filled with hope, uncertainty, and the constant demand for stability at the most important position in football, the questions surrounding Shedeur Sanders, once hyped as the next big thing, now penciled in as the team's third quarterback and emergency option, looms larger than ever. Because when head coach Kevin Stefanski confirmed that Bailey Zappi was joining the practice squad, and that Joe Flacco would remain the starter with Dylan Gabriel entrenched as QB2. It sent a ripple of both frustration and curiosity through the fan base, leaving many to ask whether Sanders' chance in Cleveland is already slipping away, or if patience will ultimately reveal a star waiting for his moment. And when you consider the trajectory of Browns quarterbacks over the last 2 decades, the 37 different starters since 2001, the carousel of failed experiments, the flashes of promise extinguished before they could burn steadily, it is hard to simply dismiss Sanders as a footnote in the never-ending search for consistency, because the very pattern of this franchise suggests that opportunities, however delayed, eventually surface. And the players who seize them can change not only their careers, but the direction of the team itself. And that's why, despite Sanders being slotted as the third quarterback today, the larger story may only just be beginning, because Cleveland has been here before, has doubted before, has shuffled depth charts before, and often the overlooked figure ends up commanding the spotlight when circumstances inevitably shift, whether through injury, performance, or the sheer weight of public and locker room pressure. And what makes Sanders such a compelling subject is not only the controversy over how his competition in camp was handled. Many fans felt he never received meaningful reps with the first-team offensive line, never faced defenses that could fairly measure his skill against Gabriel's, and thus was treated less like a contender and more like a placeholder, but also the undeniable pedigree he brings from college, where he threw 37 touchdowns, set records at Colorado, led the FBS in completion percentage, and earned recognition as an Offensive Player of the Year, achievements that just a year ago had draft analysts discussing him alongside Cam Ward as a potential first-round pick, proof that his fall into the later rounds was not about talent, but about circumstance, timing, and the fickle nature of NFL evaluations, which is precisely why so many in Cleveland are skeptical of the organization's decision to push him down the depth chart so early. Because when has this franchise earned unquestioned trust in its quarterback evaluations? When has it consistently developed and retained a franchise-caliber player at that position? And the truth is that outside of Baker Mayfield, who himself became a polarizing figure and was ultimately let go despite maturing into a top 10 quarterback in Tampa Bay, the Browns have consistently mismanaged, misjudged, or simply mishandled the most important role in sports. And with that history in mind, it is reasonable, even responsible, for Browns fans to worry that the same mistake could be unfolding again with Sanders, who in his NFL debut against Carolina showed poise, accuracy, and a willingness to take shots downfield, throwing 2 perfect touchdown passes that reminded everyone why scouts once raved about his ceiling. A performance that stood in sharp contrast to Gabriel's more methodical, less explosive style of short and intermediate throws. And while Gabriel has his strengths, timing, accuracy, the ability to march down the field in structured fashion, the sense of electricity, the flash of something greater, something potentially franchise-defining, seemed to belong to Sanders. And yet, here we are, watching him relegated to an emergency role, dressed but not trusted, celebrated but not given the opportunity to compete on equal footing. And the frustration is compounded by the fact that Cleveland's coaching staff framed the preseason as a true quarterback battle, a merit-based competition, only for fans to watch Gabriel receive the lion's share of meaningful reps, effectively tilting the contest from the outset, which raises the uncomfortable but familiar question of whether the Browns front office is prioritizing draft status and political capital over pure football performance. Because Gabriel, as a third-round pick, carries the weight of organizational investment, while Sanders, though once projected higher, slipped into the later rounds and thus represents less immediate value to protect. But football is not about protecting egos in the front office. It is about winning games. And as the long history of Browns quarterbacks shows, from Tim Couch to Brady Quinn, from Colt McCoy to Brandon Weeden, from Johnny Manziel to Deshaun Kaiser, the team has wasted far too much time justifying draft picks and not enough time letting the best player prove himself on the field. And that is why fans are restless, because they fear Sanders could be yet another name to add to the tragic list of missed opportunities. Another quarterback with raw talent, never fully tested in Cleveland. Another reminder of what could have been if the team had simply chosen differently. But of course, the story is not yet written, because in the NFL, depth charts are fluid. Circumstances change in a heartbeat, and what today feels like a closing door could tomorrow become the gateway to a breakout, especially when the starter is a 40-year-old veteran like Joe Flacco, who, while still capable, cannot realistically be expected to carry a team for multiple seasons. And though his presence as captain and leader is invaluable, he was voted by teammates to wear the armband alongside stars like Joel Bitonio, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and Corey Bojorquez. Proof that the locker room not only respects his experience but sees him as the man to guide them through this campaign. The reality is that his time is finite, and eventually the Browns will have to look past him, either to Gabriel or Sanders. And that looming transition will reignite the debate now only smoldering, because while Gabriel is safe, steady, and respected, Sanders still represents the spark, the potential for greatness that fans cling to. The dream that Cleveland, after decades of wandering, could finally land the kind of franchise quarterback who defines eras, the kind of player who stops the revolving door of 37 starters and instead plants his name on the franchise's history with permanence. And what fuels that hope is not only Sanders' talent, but the emotional fatigue of Browns fans who have endured years of dashed expectations, from the high draft picks that never panned out to the veterans who came and went without leaving a lasting mark. And in that fatigue lies a desperate desire not to see another promising talent slip away, especially when the evidence of Sanders' potential is there on tape, even if imperfect. Because yes, against the Rams he held the ball too long. Yes, he struggled with pocket presence, but to dismiss him over one poor performance while Gabriel is excused for equally limited flashes feels unfair, feels short-sighted, feels like the kind of decision that this franchise has too often regretted in hindsight. And the longer Sanders sits, the louder the conversation will grow. Because Cleveland is a football city that lives and dies with its quarterbacks, and the media, the fans, and the endless churn of sports talk will not allow Sanders' name to fade quietly. Not when his story is still unwritten. Not when his ceiling is still higher than the man above him on the depth chart. And not when the team's long history screams for one chance, just one chance, to see if this player could finally be the answer. And that is why this season is so pivotal, because while Flacco commands the respect of the locker room and the excitement of the fan base for now, the comeback player of the year, the man who last season delivered a 4-1 stretch into the playoffs, throwing for 300 yards a game like it was 2012 again, the veteran cool enough to laugh in shades with David Njoku on Instagram, the Joe Cool who embodies both steadiness and swagger. His reign is temporary, and once the Browns turn the page, whether by necessity or design, the choice between Gabriel and Sanders will resurface with even more weight. And when it does, the team cannot afford to mishandle it again, because the stakes are too high, the patience of the fan base too thin, the margin for error too slim, and the history too damning. And so as Cleveland opens this campaign with high vibes, with Flacco as captain, with Bitonio anchoring the line in his 12th season, with Garrett terrorizing quarterbacks and Ward shutting down receivers, with Bojorquez booming 80-yard punts that flip the field, the conversation about Sanders does not fade into the background but instead hangs over it all. A constant reminder that the search for a franchise quarterback remains unfinished, that the promise of stability is still fragile, that the story of Sanders is still unfolding, and that the Browns, for all their strides, for all their progress, still carry the weight of their past. And if they are to finally break free, finally change the narrative, finally silence the carousel, they cannot afford to ignore potential, cannot afford to waste talent, cannot afford to let Shedeur Sanders slip quietly into irrelevance. Because in Cleveland, the quarterback is never just a player. He is a symbol, a hope, a chance at redemption for a city that has waited too long, endured too much, and deserves, at long last, to find its guy.